This is spaced repetition. Memorize faster with zero effort while you're doing literally anything. Imagine being able to memorize information extremely quickly without having to study or practice at all. Imagine how much easier school would be if memorizing facts and formulas didn't take any effort. You could literally just daydream your way through classes and still get straight A's. And it gets even better because this isn't some kind of cheat code that only works for a select few people. It's something anyone can do once they understand the basics. I first learned about spaced repetition from a friend in university. He was one of those people who never seemed to crack open the textbook, but always had a 4.0 GPA. So I sat him down one day and asked him for his secrets. He told me he used a technique called spaced repetition, which allowed him to memorize information with almost no effort. And as I started implementing it into my own life, I began seeing dramatic improvements in my ability to memorize things. The basic idea behind spaced repetition is to use a simple formula to help you remember information over long periods of time. But it's not some magical formula like 3 asterisk x plus to y equals z. It's more like this. Remember it. Forget it. Remember it again. Forget it again. Remember it again. As you can see, there's a lot of forgetting involved in this process, but that's actually the point. Because while the act of remembering something does require effort, the more you force yourself to remember something, the more it ingrains into your brain and the easier it is to recall later on. This doesn't just apply to memorizing facts and figures either. This can be applied to learning languages, picking up musical instruments, forming new habits, retaining knowledge from books you read, and so much more. But today we're going to focus on memorizing information for exams and other similar situations. If you want to start using spaced repetition to improve your memory, there are 3 main steps you need to follow. The first step is to identify the material that you want to memorize. This could be anything from formulas to dates to names and places. The second step is to organize the material into groups based on how similar they are. For example, if you're studying for a history exam, you might group together all the events that happened in the French Revolution and all the events that happened during the American Civil War. Grouping things together makes it easier to remember them in large quantities because your brain can make connections between different pieces of information. After organizing the material, you need to memorize each group using active recall. To do this, you want to test yourself by trying to remember everything you can about each group. If you're studying for a history exam, you might close your eyes and try to recite all the events you can remember from the French Revolution. Or, if you're trying to learn the periodic table, you might try to say the chemical symbol and atomic number of each element without looking at the table. At first, you won't be able to remember very much, but as you continue practicing, you'll be able to remember more and more. And that's the whole point. By forcing yourself to actively recall information, you're helping it to sink deeper into your brain. Once you've memorized each group, it's time to move on to step 3, which is to link the groups together. To do this, you want to find connections between the different groups of information. For example, if you're studying for a history exam, you might think about how the French Revolution and the American Civil War are similar or different. By making these connections, you're creating a web of knowledge that links all the information together. This makes it easier to remember because instead of trying to remember isolated facts, you're trying to remember a web of interconnected ideas. At this point, you've probably noticed a major flaw with this system. You have to remember the information in the first place in order for it to work. But what if you have such a bad memory that you can't even remember the first time around? Well, fortunately, there is a solution to this problem. It's called the Leitner system. Invented by a psychologist named Herbert Ebbinghaus, the Leitner system is a way of organizing flashcards so that you are guaranteed to remember them over long periods of time. Unlike traditional flashcard systems where you just go through the same deck of cards over and over again, the Leitner system forces you to actively retrieve the information you want to memorize. This helps you to remember the information much more quickly and efficiently. Let's say you want to memorize the following equation, E equals mc squared. You can create a flashcard with the question, what is the equation for mass-energy equivalence, and the answer E equals mc squared. Then you would put the flashcard into a box labeled 1. Once you've memorized the equation, you would move the flashcard to box 2. If you forget the equation before you reach box 2, then you put it back into box 1 and try to memorize it again. If you remember the equation when you reach box 2, you would move it to box 3. And if you remember it from box 3, you move it to box 4. And finally, if you remember it from box 4, you move it to the 5 box and consider the equation memorized. By following this system, you are forced to actively retrieve the information you want to memorize in order to move the flashcard to the next box. This helps you to remember the information much more quickly and efficiently than traditional flashcard systems. Also, by the way, if you're finding value in this video, please hit the like button. It really helps me out. Now let us talk about how you can combine the two methods we've discussed today to maximize your memorization potential. When using spaced repetition, the goal is to memorize information with almost no effort. This means that you shouldn't be spending hours upon hours studying for exams. Instead, you should be able to memorize information quickly and easily. To achieve this level of mastery, you need to use the Leitner system to memorize each group of information. Once you've memorized each group, you need to link them together using active recall and then repeat the process. This will create a web of interconnected ideas that will be easy to recall later on. Let's go back to the example of memorizing the periodic table. Using the Leitner system, you would create a flashcard for each group of elements and then organize the flashcards into different boxes based on how well you know them. For example, you might have a box for elements 1 through 10, a box for elements 11 through 20, and so on. Once you've organized the flashcards, you would start with the first box and try to memorize the elements in that box. If you can memorize all the elements in a given box, you would move onto the next box and continue until you've gone through all the boxes. But here's the key. Don't just memorize the elements in each box. Try to link them together. For example, when you're memorizing the elements in the first box, try to remember how they relate to the elements in the second box. Once you've memorized the first two boxes, try to memorize the third box and so on. By linking the groups of elements together, you're creating a web of knowledge that will make it easier to remember the entire periodic table. So there you have it. In just a few easy steps, you can use spaced repetition to memorize information extremely quickly. With a little practice, you'll be able to retain knowledge from books you read, pick up new skills with ease and ace every exam you take. Just remember to use the Leitner system to memorize each group of information and then link the groups together using active recall. If you enjoyed this video, I highly recommend checking out my last video on how to improve your memory. Thanks for watching and I hope you keep crushing it.